Epps, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. We do have a day filled with information that we are all excited about. So I wanted to turn it actually over to Adrienne Jones so that she can do our welcome and prayer this morning. But, excuse me, before I do that, I wanted to also share with you guys that we know that you all may have a lot of questions today. So feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we will have a Q&A session with Dr. Dotson and we will address all of those questions. There may be an opportunity for you to share your questions live. I may call on you depending on the time, but just know that this is a very interactive training and we want you all to be really empowered to keep your health and your brain fit and healthy. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, Adrienne, for our welcome and prayer.
Okay, thank you, Mia. Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday, and most definitely Happy New Year. I know it seems like forever since our last webinar, but again, what a blessing it is to be able to come together. And I'm pretty sure I know some of you, but if not, my name is Adrienne, and as always, I have the pleasure of working with Faith Village Connections and the Altar program. Just as Mia said, today we are presenting Brain Fitness 101 by Dr. Vonetta Dotson of CerebroFit. Dr. Dotson is going to equip you with some of the best practices to incorporate in your daily routine to help you achieve and maintain a healthy brain. So, are you ready to get your brain in shape? I know everybody is saying yes, because of course you are. I heard one of my favorite preachers say one time, a short pencil is better than a long memory. So, with that, get your pen and pad and get ready just to jot some things down, jot down some thoughts, and of course, jot down your questions. So, just to reinforce the agenda, after you hear my voice, you will hear Dr. Fayron Epps, who's going to bring the purpose of the program, followed by the introduction of the speaker. From Mia Chester, and the brain health presentation by Dr. Dotson, followed by the Q&A session. And lastly, Ms. Chester will discuss brain health resources. So before we move forward, let us all just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for today. We thank you, Lord God, just for touching us to be able to wake up this morning. Lord God, we thank you, God, for the panelists that are here this morning to share some great ideas. Father God, we know that you are a healer. We know that you can heal any disease and there is nothing too big for you. But God, we thank you that you have put professionals in place to help us, Lord God, and to give us the information and the strategies and the practices that we need to maintain healthy living. It's in your name we pray, and I have to say, Amen. Go ahead, Dr. Epps. You got it.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for that. And good morning again, everyone. Like Adrienne said, I think I know many of you, and if not, I'll just give you a little bit background. I'm an assistant professor of nursing at Emory University, and I'm also the lead for the Altar program and Faith Village. And both of these programs, just to give you a little background, our goal is to inspire and equip faith communities, those in the African community, on how to better support those living with dementia, and also to become aware of what things that they can do to reduce their risk of getting various different forms of dementia. And we do this through research, through education, and service. So I'm very excited to have you all join us this morning. We put on webinars throughout the year on various different topics. So when you get the survey, or you feel free to type in the chat box, if there's additional things that you'd like to know, please let us know, and we will be able to put together a webinar. I feel that it's so important for us to get this information out to the African American community, and also work with our churches so we can be aware, we can be knowledgeable, and at the end of the day, we'll be more equipped to take care of ourselves, to take care of our family, our friends. And that's what it's about for us, knowing what are those resources, what are those things we need to do. I also feel that it's very important that I do bring in professionals that look like us, look like the community that we'll be serving. And so we can really tailor and address some of the issues that really go on in our community, so we can reduce disparities and really have some great outcomes. And that's the whole goal of what I'm doing when I'm working with Mia, Adrian, bringing in Dr. Dotson. And I think she has some of the, we have some shared goals with that, because we really want our community, I want my family to be well, to be healthy, and know what they need to do. And as well, I want my community to be like that. So thank you all again for being here. And I am a nurse scientist. So throughout, and especially throughout at the end, I'll probably be bringing up some of my research, because I love just sharing our stories and, exploring ways that we can improve our quality of life as we learn more about keeping our brain fit, and also learning about caring for those with dementia. So again, welcome, and I will pass the mic to Ms. Chester.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Epps. So it is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Dotson. She is a neuropsychologist, author, and speaker. She completed her doctoral training in clinical psychology at the University of Florida in 2006, with a specialization in neuropsychology and a certificate in gerontology. She's a licensed psychologist in the state of Georgia, and her career has focused on teaching, providing clinical care, and conducting research related to brain health and aging. Dr. Dotson is a senior project scientist for behavioral health at NASA and an author of the upcoming book, Keeping Your Brain Young, a science-based approach to strengthening and protecting your aging brain. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dotson. And with that being said, we will turn it over to you so you can enlighten us today.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I just think it's fantastic that you all offer these seminars regularly and are doing such a great service for the community. So I appreciate the chance to be here and share some of my favorite topics with you. My career is more and more focusing on how I can empower the community, and in particular thinking about communities that don't normally get information, such as the Black community, about how to live in a way that can really maintain and protect your brain. So everything we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the main research findings about what we know can help the brain stay healthy even as we age, even in late life. But there's so much more we could say. So we're barely scratching the surface, but I want you to get the highlights for today, ask plenty of questions, follow up with me. I have my contact information at the end, but that's kind of a warning that, hold on tight. It's going to be a quick ride because there's a lot to cover and not nearly enough time. So let's see what we can get into today. So next slide, please. So why are we talking about brain health? So some of these things you probably already know from past seminars and webinars that you've attended, but having a healthy brain is vital to having a full and healthy life. And we know that when our brain is healthy, there's a lot of things that then follow. When our brain is healthy, we tend to have a better memory and better cognitive skills. And that's at any age. That's going to be when you're a child through adulthood into late life. The healthier your brain, the better your memory and cognitive abilities. We know that when our brain is healthy, we can actually lower our risk for things like Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. So I'm sure you all know by now that we don't have a cure for dementia. We don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia, but there are things that we can do that can reduce our risk. And that's true even if you have a genetic risk for some of these conditions. You can still either minimize that risk, or you can possibly slow down how quickly you develop symptoms if you have a healthy brain. one of the big things that I focus on in my own research is how the healthy brain is important for mood. So there's a strong link, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, between your brain and things like depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. And there seems to be a relationship that goes both ways, that if your brain is not healthy, that can lead to problems such as depression, but also that if you have untreated depression, anxiety, that can also start to affect your brain. And so you want to have a healthy brain to stop that cycle and to instead have better mood, better overall well-being. So those are kind of all tied together. The better mood and well-being as well as that risk for depression and anxiety. And then particularly as we get older, we think about functional independence. So whether or not someone has dementia or they've had a stroke, as we get older, we're more likely to have difficulties or find it a little bit harder to do day-to-day skills. So it can just be managing your finances. It could be how well you're driving, all of those things that you need to be able to do independently. Can start to decline to some degree if you're starting to have problems with your memory and your other cognitive skills. So when your brain is healthier, because your cognitive skills and your memory are better, you also do better at all those functional things that tend to get a little bit more difficult to do as you get older. So as you can see, lots of benefits for having a healthy brain. And again, this is just an overview of some of the high notes there. So healthy brains are important. Next slide. So we know from research that a healthy, active lifestyle equals a healthy brain. And that's really the focus of what I want to talk about today, that in order to get all those benefits that I just summarized for you, there are certain things that we know are part of a healthy lifestyle that can help you keep a healthy brain. So this is just showing you the overview of what we're going to get into, but there's kind of 6 main things. And we'll just go on to the next slide and I'll get into the first one, which has to do with exercise. So I have to say, this was one of my favorite things to talk about, and I could do a whole hour just talking about exercise. If I had to tell you to do one thing for your brain to be healthier, I would tell you to exercise. It is the best thing that you can do for your brain. And this is one of those areas of research that I got into more as I went through my career. So I'll tell you a little story. I tell the story, I think, every single time I talk about this. But, I did my graduate training. I went and did my postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute on Aging. Great experiences, great training that I received. But it wasn't until my first semester as a professor, at that time I was at the University of Florida, that I learned about this research that's been happening for a couple of decades now about how exercise changes the brain. So I had been focusing more on depression and how does that relate to the brain and how does that relate to dementia, all important topics. But it was kind of like my focus was more on like all the things that can go wrong and trying to understand that. And so in this class I'm teaching, so first of all, it was intimidating because I found out that the chair of my department, his son was taking my class. And I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be like so intimidating because I kind of have a spy for my boss in my class. But this particular student gave a presentation about some of the research he was doing with another researcher in the university. And this researcher's focusing on doing brain scans of people before and after they had done exercise for a certain period of time, that they would have these exercise interventions where they'd say, maybe for 6 months, they would have people work out 3 times a week and they would have them come into the research center and kind of supervise it, make sure they were really doing it, and then see what happens to the brain after that amount of time. So it turned out that when people did this kind of intervention, their brain changed. Literally, parts of their brain got bigger. Parts of their brain were communicating better with other parts of their brain, and they were able to show this with their brain scans. And so even though you would think that as the teacher, I'd be kind of knowing what the students are going to talk about, I'm listening and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, really? Like I'm sitting there listening like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. My student is teaching me this amazing area of research that I wasn't familiar with at the time. And what I found particularly exciting about this is that the parts of the brain that tend to change with exercise, number one are the parts of the brain that tend to decline as we get older. So as we get older, it's normal for the brain to have certain changes. Certain parts of the brain get smaller. Some parts of the brain don't have as much blood flow. That's one of the reasons why we tend to have more memory problems and other issues that could come up as we get older. Well, exercise directly affects those parts of the brain the most. So I always say, sort of joking, sort of serious, that if there is a fountain of youth, it's exercise, because it allows you to keep your brain younger. But then also for the work that I do in depression, there's this big overlap between parts of the brain that are linked to depression and also what happens in exercise, where exercise helps to improve the health of those areas. So for me, it was kind of like a new world open up to me, hearing this amazing research. And since that time, I've incorporated exercise into my own research and also into my clinical work, really making a point to encourage my patients, my clients to use exercise as a way of making their brain stronger. So what are the specifics of what happens to the brain with exercise? Well, number one, there's the structure of the brain. By structure, I mean the health of the nerve cells or the brain cells that are called neurons. There's the size of different parts of the brain. Those are different aspects of the structure of the brain. Exercise actually makes the structure of the brain healthier. Exercise can literally lead to the growth of new cells in the brain. And because of that, it can increase the volume of the brain. So that means that, for example, as we get older, there's parts of the brain, and particularly in the front areas of the brain called the frontal lobes, that tend to get smaller as we get older. Exercise will actually cause an increase in the size of the brain, rather than having that decrease that happens as we get older. I think that's amazing, very exciting. There was a time when researchers thought that in late life that our brain was static, that we couldn't do anything to change it, that whatever brain cells you had, that's what you're stuck with. And if you have them become unhealthy, then too bad. Well, now we know it's not true. We actually can still have what's called plasticity. The brain can still change, even into your 80s, 90s, and beyond. Again, really powerful, I think, message there. There's also the function of the brain. So for our brain to basically help us do everything that we do, we need the brain for literally everything that we do, breathing, speaking, talking, walking, everything we do. We need the brain to function well. We need the brain to have the blood flow that it needs to feed those brain cells, to communicate with each other, and then to kind of power all of your movements and thoughts. And exercise improves the functioning of the brain. That when you're doing different tasks, it can be a mental task, like trying to remember a list of words or remember someone's name or a phone number. It can be a physical task. Whatever it is that you're doing, the brain functions better when you are more physically fit. People who start exercising, even if they were more sedentary before, will get a boost to their functioning in their brain because they've started to move more, because they have that physical activity. Related to that is the connections in the brain. So without getting too nerdy on you here, the brain works, different parts of the brain function together. So the brain has to communicate between different areas of the brain. And so there's what we call connections, meaning that one part of the brain has to signal the other part and kind of work together to do anything that you do. And so those connections and that communication between different cells in the brain also gets improved when you exercise. So that means you're having healthier neurons, you're getting more blood flow to the neurons, and your connection between those neurons are all going to be better with exercise. And again, neurons are the cells in the brain cells. And then the last part that I think is really important, particularly when you think about the Black community, is that exercise really helps to improve vascular health. So when you think about heart disease, you think about high blood pressure and cholesterol and diabetes and things that we know that there are health disparities, that African Americans are more likely to be afflicted by these different conditions. Exercise, everyone knows if you see a heart doctor, they say, okay, exercise. So of course that's true, it makes your heart stronger, but it also directly affects your brain. It means the blood supply in your brain, the arteries and the veins and the capillaries in your brain that all are supplying blood that's needed for your brain to function. All of that is healthier when you exercise. And so it's not just your heart health that's getting better, it's also the blood supply to your brain that is improved when you exercise. So that's a lot of benefits that you're getting from exercise, and all of it is directly affecting the brain. Next slide, please. This is really important as we get older. So everything that I mentioned is true throughout your life, that whether you're a child or an older adult, everything in between, that exercise is beneficial. But I do think it's important to know that as you age, exercise can be really helpful to allow you to age well, to allow you to age with less cognitive impairment, with less problems. So again, I mentioned this already, that as we get older, even without having dementia or having a stroke or something like that, we tend to have changes in our brain that happen, where some parts of the brain get smaller, the brain is not as efficient in terms of its functioning. That's part of normal aging. Well, people who exercise throughout their life, particularly in middle age and then continuing into later life, they tend to have less of that decline as they get older. So exercise can preserve and in some cases reverse the changes that tend to happen in the brain with aging. And so I already mentioned that. There was one really great study, this was probably 10, 15 years ago, but one of those kind of early studies that sort of set this field of research going, that showed that they compared older adults who were either really physically active and physically fit, or those who weren't. And they looked over time, and I believe it was a 1-year study this time. And the people who were exercising more, well, let me flip it. The people who were not exercising during that year had, I think like 1.5, basically had decline in the size of the brain in the part of the frontal lobes. It was not a huge amount, but it was still something they could pick up on. It was maybe like 1.5, 2%. Well, the people who were exercising, the ones who were really active, not only did they not show that decline, they actually showed an increase in the size of the brain. And so you're saying that not only are you avoiding the decline, you're actually showing an increase in the size of the brain just after, in this case, after a year. So if you think about over time, over 10 years, let's say from age 60 to age 70, if you think about what could be happening in terms of your brain declining if you don't exercise, and then you kind of instead flip it and think about, okay, during those 10 years, are you staying active? It can be a really powerful effect where you can stay stable or maybe even improve in terms of your brain. Really important for, I think, all of us, we're worried about ourselves, our family developing Alzheimer's disease or another type of dementia, and exercise can help it can not only help you not have the outward manifestations, meaning that you're not having those memory problems, but it can actually reduce how much your brain builds up the things that cause dementia. So in other words, when we have Alzheimer's disease, the two main things that we see in the brain are, we call them plaques and tangles. And so that picture there is showing you an example of what that looks like under a microscope. So that we call that the pathology. So what's going wrong in the brain? Exercise basically helps to prevent that buildup of those things in the brain that cause dementia. So at the very basic level of the brain cells, it's kind of keeping the brain from building up those toxins that can cause dementia. And that is really, really powerful in terms of thinking about reducing your risk. And then as you might expect, we know you need the brain for healthy cognitive functioning. And so as you get older, you can improve or maintain your memory and your cognitive abilities. So again, throughout your life, exercise is very powerful for your brain health, but is particularly helpful in terms of thinking about the aging process and being able to reduce some of the things that can come with aging. Next slide, please. So the long and short then is to get moving. We want to keep ourselves active in order to try to maintain the best brain health. And so what I have here on this slide is just a summary of what the World Health Organization and other organizations, including the American Heart Association, recommend in terms of physical activity. The recommendation is that everyone get aerobic activity, meaning things that are going to make you breathe hard and kind of get your heart pumping, as well as strengthening exercises. Some people, I think, they underestimate how important it is to actually build muscle as well. Doesn't mean you need to be a bodybuilder. It just means that you want to have strong muscles, which can help you prevent osteoporosis, that can help you prevent falls, other things that can happen as we get older. So the recommendation is 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. Okay, so if you break that down, that's going to be what, 2.5 hours. Doesn't mean you go and have a whole afternoon of working out. It means that throughout your week, you want to make sure that you're getting half an hour here, even 10 minutes here and there. That adds up to 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. Now, moderate intensity can be something like riding a bike. It can be walking at a really brisk pace, so not a leisurely walk, but walking fast. It can be doing kind of like lower intensity dancing, which I think things like, if you like Zumba classes or things like that can be great. That's going to be moderate intensity. Or you could instead have more vigorous intensity depending on your health and your abilities. So vigorous intensity will be things more like running as opposed to walking fast. It can be things like swimming. It can be more intense dancing. So that can be more vigorous intensity. And then you can mix and match. It doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, I'm only going to do vigorous or only do moderate. You can kind of do a combination. But that's sort of the goal that you want for getting your heart pumping. And then you also want to 2 days a week work on building muscle. And so you want to work on all your major muscle groups. And this doesn't mean, again, that you're trying to, that you have to be in a gym lifting some heavy weights. It can be body weight. It can be doing push-ups. It can be, I hate dips. You can have, if you think about what they call tricep dips and you're at home, you have a chair, you put your hands in the back, and I'm not going to show you how to do that right now. But the point being is that there's body weight exercises that you can do. So this can be done in various ways. You can get cans of beans or something and do bicep curls. There's so many ways that you can be creative just to do something that's using your muscles. And so you want to try to get that 2 days a week as well. People who are over the age of 65, the World Health Organization suggests that they also have a couple days a week of getting balance and flexibility training. Now, I would recommend that we all do that because so I teach a class actually that's called Body Flow. It's a mixture of yoga and Pilates and Tai Chi, and that does have a lot of balance and flexibility. For me, I find that I sit a lot working on things on my computer because of my job. And so I need that movement to like not have my back hurt because I've been sitting for 6 hours a day. I find that when I do balance and flexibility exercises, that it just helps my body feel better. And so even though it's particularly recommended for 65 and older, I think all of us can benefit from doing things that are just trying to loosen up our body a little bit. And then also working on balance, which is important as we age for helping to prevent falls and that sort of thing. So those are general recommendations for moving. There's much more we could say, but I'm going to move on to some other healthy behaviors. And again, we can talk about this more if you have questions about that. So next slide. Okay. So the other activities I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly, but exercise is my favorite. So I had to spend a little bit more time on that one. But let's talk about the other parts. So you want to stay mentally active throughout your life. So engage your brain is what I say. And so what research tells us is that when we keep our mind active, basically use it or lose it applies to our brain. So, and this is true again throughout your life. What you do early in life matters, but what you do later in life matters too. So there's, for example, research that shows that your educational experiences from the time that you're young throughout your life impact how your brain ages. So if you it's not just about finishing school either. It's about where you actually engaged in and getting quality education. So people who have a solid education, and again, good quality, not just finishing school, tend to have what we call cognitive reserve. That means that you can kind of you can protect yourself from some of the age-related problems with memory that can happen later on, memory and cognitive functioning, if you've had that earlier experience of enriching your brain, of basically kind of keeping your brain active. Now, let's say you didn't go far in school. What does it mean? Oh my gosh, that means I'm going to have a bad course. What you do later matters too. So if you have that early education, that can help set you on a good path, but what you do later matters as well. So what you do job-wise is important. Is your job keeping your mind going? Are you doing something that's more kind of automatic, that you don't have to think or organize or kind of put things together or problem solve? The more you do those things, the better in terms of keeping your mind active. But now, having said that, let's say you didn't go far in school. Let's say your job is something that's more basic and not requiring as much mental kind of stimulation. That's fine, because you still have the rest of your life. You still have hobbies. You still have what you do after work. You have what you do on the weekends. And so what's really great is that you can get mental stimulation lots of different ways. And so that can be anything from basically learning something new. So it could be that you're learning that you're solving puzzles, or that you're learning how to play an instrument, or you're going and just learning about new things. You go to, not so much during COVID, but regular times, you go to a museum, or you travel, even things like volunteering and being around other people, which we'll get into, keeps your mind active. So you just want to have that your activities that you're doing are keeping your mind stimulated, that you're challenging your mind. And so research shows that regardless of what you did earlier in life, people who are in middle age or older, if they keep their mind active, they can actually get a boost in their cognitive functioning, and that their brain can change. Again, they can actually show these sort of increases in brain size in different areas, better connections between parts of the brain. So it's not that you have to give up if you didn't earlier on have that mental activity. So throughout your life, keep your mind engaged. And so there's kind of four main things you want to think of for keeping your brain engaged. Think about something that's challenging. So, and that doesn't mean that like every single day you have to do something like completely like this driving you crazy. It means that you want to have regular sort of activities that do challenge your mind. So one thing for myself that I've thought about, and I haven't done this yet, but I would like to at some point try to learn a new language, because that's something that's going to be completely different. I did take Spanish when I was in high school and college, but it's been a long time since I've thought about that. And so it doesn't mean that I have to spend hours every day doing it. It means that I would spend, a couple hours a week spread it out trying to like learn a new language. I want to learn how to play the piano. And so in my so-called free time, which I don't have that much of, but I'm going to make some free time, that to me is fun, but that will be challenging. And so what I like about those things for myself is that, number one, it's challenging. I've never done it before. It's going to require me to kind of think outside the box. It's new because I haven't, particularly the piano, I have never done that before. So it's going to be different. It's engaging because I can't just passively learn to play the piano. I have to be doing something actively. And then for me, that's fun. I love music. I love the piano in particular. And so for me, that kind of fits all those categories. So you want to kind of think of, okay, is there a hobby I can take up? Something that I can start doing that, again, you don't want it to feel like a chore, but something that you would find enjoyable that requires you to think in a different way. That's how you can kind of engage your brain, regardless of what you do for a living, regardless of your education beforehand. You can also decide that you want to do something that's more structured. So for example, people will decide to go back to school or take an online class that's not necessarily trying to get a degree, but they just want to learn something new. And so again, I'm kind of a nerd. So I've already decided that, after I slow down career-wise, which will happen at some point in my life, that I love learning. And so I can see myself, for example, taking some classes on like architecture. I don't know why I like architecture, but I do. I think it's really cool. And so there's all kinds of, like Coursera, I think, is one of the online places, other websites that have free classes that you can take. And again, you're not worried about getting graded. You're just trying to learn something new. You get to hear some lectures from people who are experts in different areas, read some things. So you can do it in a more formal way. You can do it more informally with hobbies. You can do it through your job, but whatever it is, keep your brain active. That's the main point to take from this. Okay, next slide. All right, the third activity. So we talked about physical activity, we talked about mental activity, and there's social activity. And this ends up being connected a lot to that mental activity part. It is really important to stay socially connected. Now, I know that's hard to say that right now during the time of COVID, where social connections are harder to make. But hopefully, the fact that you're even here on a webinar means that you've gotten comfortable with having some degree of online connections. So technology can be a way of trying to partially get around some of the restrictions. I know it's not the same, it's not quite as fulfilling as in-person activity, but it's still helpful. It turns out that social activity is really, really important for brain health. People who are socially engaged, and that can mean different things for different people. I'm not saying that you have to have a circle of 50 friends and you hang out with them all like every week. That's kind of overkill. It just means that you have a network of people, friends and family who, and I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear that, but my dogs are barking, but I think we're used to those things happening during webinars. But people who have a network of people who they feel connected to, who they feel they can turn to for support, for fun, for enjoyment, for venting about things, for giving and receiving kind of social support, meaning that you're, they're attentive to your needs, you're attentive to theirs. Having those kinds of social relationships are really important. And people who tend to have those connections tend to have better cognitive functioning throughout their life. And again, when people who, as they get older, stay socially connected or increase their social connections, they can even possibly reverse some of the declines that we tend to see with aging in different parts of the brain. So it's one of those ways that people don't always think about. They know that, okay, I feel better. I feel maybe my mood is better. I feel like my quality of life is better when I'm socially connected, which is certainly true. And we know that for things like depression, staying socially connected is really important. But I don't think everyone realizes that it actually can literally change your brain, that you can really have improvements in how your brain is functioning and the structure of the brain as well when you have those social connections. And then the reverse is also true, that people who report feeling lonely. And so just to kind of clarify a little bit, loneliness, when we talk about that from a research standpoint, from a clinical standpoint, loneliness is when you have a disconnect between the social connections you want and the social connections you have. And I say that because everyone's different. And so the example that I've given before is that I'm a super social person. I love being around people. You can probably tell I love talking. I love just interacting with people. One of my best friends in the world is really not quite the same. She has a much smaller group of people. She loves her alone time, and I like alone time too, but not as much. And so we were talking in the early days of the pandemic because I was just going crazy from being disconnected from people. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to explode if I can't find some creative ways to have more connection with people. And she's like, she goes, I don't really like people. This is fine for me. This is one of the good things about COVID. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how do you feel that way? For me, that seems insane. So for her, she's not feeling lonely when she's not having as much social contact. She's just like, hey, I'm fine. Whereas for me, I'm like, no, I need that contact. I'm feeling lonely. And so the important thing is, what are you having this mismatch between what you want and what you're getting? And when people are lonely for extended periods of time, that can start to affect your brain. And so research shows that loneliness is linked to decline in cognitive functioning, that it can change the structure and function of your brain. And unfortunately, having this chronic loneliness is associated with buildup of some of the brain markers of Alzheimer's disease. And so in terms of preventing dementia and preventing cognitive problems, social connection is really important to make sure that you're not having that it's like a domino effect, that you feel lonely, and then that can start to lead to depression, which can then start to lead to brain changes. And so you really want to try to think about that having social connections is really important, not just for your mood, that you want to feel better throughout your day, but for long-term things such as having clinical depression, such as having dementia. So stay connected to the degree that feels good for you. Again, not everyone's the same. So think about for yourself, are there creative ways to stay connected to people? Again, even when you have things like COVID happening. And I will say that even though I'm mentioning COVID because it's so relevant, aside from the pandemic, we all have times when things can change that can make us feel more lonely. It can be that whether you relocate somewhere else, whether or not you lose someone important in your life, whether or not you're newly disabled and having to adjust to not being able to get about as much as you used to. There's all kinds of things that can restrict our social connections. And I think the key is trying to be flexible and creative about how to get those social connections. And again, technology makes it easier than it used to be to at least have some degree of connection. But again, there can be challenges to that. And I could be here all day trying to talk about that, but just think, be flexible and be creative to find ways to be able to reach out to people. So social connections are really important for the brain. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then there is food and nutrition. So the fourth kind of pillar of brain health you want to think about is eating well. And when we eat well, that also is important for our brain. So one of my pet peeves is how people like latch onto like the whatever the diet is of the moment, and they think, oh, okay, I'm gonna do this, and they go to some extreme drastic measures. And I have so many people in my life who have, really fallen for whatever the like latest diet craze is, and then they might lose weight, and then like 2 months later they're like back where they were before because they couldn't stick to it, because it's this unrealistic, extreme, restrictive diet that doesn't work for them. And that's really not what we're talking about here. And it's not saying that you should go on some, super restrictive, really extreme diet. It means you want to have dietary patterns. You want your food and eating patterns to be consistent with what we know is good for the brain. And so in general, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So heart healthy diets are the ones that are considered to be good for the brain. So you might have heard, for example, of something called the Mediterranean style diet. Now, I personally am really thrilled that that's considered a good diet, because I love what this entails. It's lots of fish and lean meats and whole grains and beans and nuts and fruits and vegetables. And I just happen to love all those things. So I'm like, yes, that works for me. So it means you're trying to have those things in your diet. It doesn't mean that you can't eat anything else, right? It means that your primary food is going to have lots of those really nutritious and lower fat foods. Now, having said that, we're all human, right? So we're all going to enjoy, I'm not gonna lie, I had a steak for dinner last night. It was delicious. I'm not saying because I'm eating my fish and my chicken that I'm not gonna have steak ever. It means that I'm going to make my primary food that I'm eating overall be consistent with things that we know are good for your heart. And so that's why I mentioned in this last part of the slide to minimize things like red meat, sugar, saturated fat, salt, refined grains. That doesn't mean you're not having them, because again, if you want to be reasonable, if you try to have a diet where like, I'm never eating any of these things, then you're going to be miserable. You're not going to stick with it. And then you're going to say, forget it, and then just have whatever you want. It's better to say, okay, I'm going to have more of these things and less of these things. And that pattern together is going to be what's going to give me the best brain health, the best heart health. So think overall patterns, think more of some things, less of other things, as opposed to thinking absolutely none of certain things. And that's my overall kind of suggestion there. So research does show that people who have these more heart healthy diets tend to have a lower risk of heart disease. They have a lower risk of stroke. They tend to have less cognitive decline as they age. They can lower the risk for dementia, and they can even have a lower lifespan. Now, I give the caveat when it comes to nutrition and brain health is that we have to look at groups of people who tend to have less of these negative things that we're trying to avoid, and then look at what they eat. And that's different than telling someone, eat this diet and only this diet, and then see what happens. It's hard to control people's eating, right? So when it comes to research, it's a little bit harder to like pinpoint. Yes, we know for sure. When we do exercise, we can say, I have this person coming into the lab 3 times a week and doing this exercise. I know they're doing it. I'm watching them do it. And then I'm seeing what happens later. When it comes to eating, we don't look at what people eat every single day. We ask them what they eat, or so it's a little bit harder. And I'm saying that not to tell you not to listen to what I just said, because I think it is important, but I like to be honest about what the strength of the research is. And so when it comes to nutrition, I think part of the reason why we get sometimes conflicting information in the media, or even sometimes from research studies, is because it's hard research to do. It's hard to pinpoint that an exact thing is leading to some positive outcome that we're looking for, such as reducing dementia risk. So that's part of the reason why I'm saying, think about your overall pattern and not focusing on like something is like completely out of your diet, because if you ever have it, then it means it's going to be the end of the world. That's anytime you hear that, then you should be skeptical. the last thing I'll say about nourishing your brain, about nutrition, is that a lot of people will ask me, particularly of the patients that I see in my practice, will say, well, should I be taking this supplement for my brain? I read somewhere that this is going to like, improve my memory and that sort of thing. And I will just be very frank and say that there is no convincing research that supplements do anything to help your brain. That there's again, so there's like Prevagen, I think was one of the ones that was like really popular that like had all these claims. There's like all these lawsuits because basically there's been no research that shows that what they're claiming actually happens, that the claims are all overstated. It is true that there are certain things like omega-3s that we know are good for our brain, but what the research shows is that it's better to get that in your diet and not through a pill, because your body absorbs it differently when it's a pill. So rather than trying to take supplements, just try to eat the foods that have omega-3s. So you're eating berries and you're eating fish and you're eating other things that have that in there. That's the best way of actually getting those nutrients that we know are important for the brain. So rather than trying to take some pill and hoping that your brain's going to get stronger, eat a diet that has those nutrients in it. And that's going to be your best bet. And it saves you money because you're going to eat anyway. So you might as well eat the food that has those nutrients rather than going and buying pills that claim that they're going to, improve your memory in 2 weeks or whatever ridiculous claims that they make that just make me roll my eyes and, want to have my own lawsuit. So anyway, so that's the thing about nutrition. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay, so next thing, sleep well. Sleep is incredibly important for the brain. And I'm going to be honest, out of all of the things that we've talked about or that I'm going to talk about today, sleep is the one that until probably the last year or so, I probably underestimated how important it is. And so I will also be honest that now that I've read more and learned more and been presenting more about sleep, I've made a big point to make sure I sleep more myself, because as a busy, I don't know what to call myself because I do so many things. As a busy neuropsychologist who wears different hats, it is easy to say, I'm just going to wake up earlier to get this done. And then I end up not getting enough sleep. And I've realized more and more that really has not been good. And I do think that psychologists and neuroscientists probably practice what we preach the least when it comes to sleeping. So I'm trying to do better myself, and I'm proud of myself that I've been doing better, even during COVID. So why am I focusing on sleep? Well, sleep is huge in terms of the impact that it has on your brain. There's a lot of research that shows that people who have sleep problems, and that can mean that they have an actual sleep disorder like insomnia or sleep apnea, but it could also just mean that they just tend not to sleep that much, that their sleep is fragmented, meaning that they have a few hours of sleep and then wake up and then go back to sleep maybe, but it's not kind of continuous, or they're just not getting much sleep. And it could be because of the shift that they're working, or it could be just because, again, they're busy and like, oh, I'll be okay with 4 hours of sleep or whatever it is. There's all kinds of research that shows that when you do that chronically, again, we're all going to have a bad night of sleep sometime. That's not the end of the world. We're not going to feel good the next day, but I'm not saying to like freak out if you have a couple bad nights. But when you chronically are not getting good sleep, research shows that people who chronically don't sleep enough actually start to have problems with their brain, that their brain can start to shrink in certain areas, that the production of new brain cells. So I talked about kind of plasticity that's tied to what we call neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the development of new brain cells. And that's something that throughout our life, when there's kind of the brain, if something happens to kind of cause the brain to shrink, that we have things like exercise that I mentioned that can cause the brain to kind of grow in other areas. So that production of new brain cells for the brain to have that plasticity can be interfered with, can be stopped or slowed down when you don't have enough sleep. So you're not kind of having that new like regeneration in the brain that you need to have. And then your communication between parts of the brain also is less efficient. So it ends up being a huge issue. So as you might expect, if the brain is being affected, then your cognitive function is affected. And so people who have sleep problems tend to have issues with their cognitive functioning. Now, I think all of us are familiar with that when it comes to just like having a bad night's sleep, right? So if you don't sleep well the next day, you feel out of it, you can't really focus so much, it's hard to keep your attention, that sort of thing. And so we know that's true. But what happens is that when you have that repeatedly over time, then you can start to have more significant problems with sleep. More problems with cognitive functioning. So the problems with sleep cause problems with cognitive functioning. And then the last point I wanted to emphasize is that sleep is actually really important for clearing out toxins in our brains, including the toxins that cause Alzheimer's disease. So there was a super cool study, and actually, if I thought about it, I would have put a link to the video in here. But there's this video that shows basically what's happening during sleep in terms of what's called cerebrospinal fluid. So it's the fluid that fills, that basically cushions our brain. So our brain is within our skull, but it's kind of floating in a way because it has cerebrospinal fluid around it. And there's also I hate saying holes in the brain, it sounds bad, but there are spaces in the brain that are also filled with what's called this cerebrospinal fluid. So it turns out that as we sleep, that cerebrospinal fluid kind of washes over the brain and clears out toxins. And so there's a video where you can see it. And so again, if you're a nerd like me, it's really cool like watching it because they were able to like measure live as someone was sleeping what was happening. And so it turns out that part of the toxins that are being removed are the toxins that cause this buildup of plaques in the brain that causes Alzheimer's disease. So if you're not getting sleep regularly, that means you're not having the brain do that maintenance that it needs to be able to kind of, rinse out those toxins so that they don't kind of stay and accumulate. And so that's one of the reasons why chronic sleep problems can lead to dementia down the road. So sleep is super, super important. That was, again, just a quick overview of it, but I did have this little table here just to show you some of the important things to consider when it comes to sleep. And again, this could be a separate lecture in and of itself, but you want to think about the timing of your sleep, certain sleep behaviors, your environment, what you eat, and then what's called mental control. So just really briefly, in terms of getting better sleep, you want to think about having a consistent time that you go to bed and wake up, as opposed to having your cycle changing all the time. And then you want to avoid taking naps. So this is important for kind of having your circadian rhythm, so your kind of like biological clock consistent. You want to do things like before you go to sleep, maybe have like a little ritual. You might say, okay, it's about an hour before I go to sleep, so I'm going to, close down the kitchen, I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to put the kids to bed, and then I'm going to sit and read for half an hour. That's like a ritual. When you do that regularly, it's kind of like a baby, where you know that like when you're or a young child, you have your you brush their teeth, you give them a bath, read them a book, and they know that signals to their body, time to wind down and go to sleep, and then they go to sleep better. So I think parents tend to know that like, hey, this helps, but then we don't do it ourselves. And so I say we, I don't have kids, I have fur babies, but you know what I mean, adults don't do it themselves. And so having that ritual is also really good for as you're older. So doing that, trying not to stay in the bed, watching TV for hours or doing other things, not staying in bed if you're not falling asleep. So if you're not sleepy, then get out of bed, do something relaxing, and then get back in bed, because you want your body to start associating your bed with sleep and not with sitting around wondering if you can ever fall asleep. Other things that can be helpful, sometimes a warm bath, having a comfortable temperature in your room. I like it a little bit colder than usual. It drives my husband crazy. Like, it's so cold in here. I'm like, get a blanket. For me, that helps me sleep better. So find a comfortable temperature, keep it dark. Things like avoiding caffeine, we all know that, before bed. Some people find it helpful to eat a light snack, but it needs to be light and not heavy. Otherwise, that will interfere. You'll have your stomach digestion keeping you awake. And then trying to avoid stimulating activities. Again, like wind down, slow down, you spend, 10, 15 minutes praying or just relaxing or using imagery, just something that's going to slow you down and not get your mind revved up, are really helpful things for sleep. So there's a lot more we could get into again, but those are some overviews of sleeping well. So next slide, please. Okay, and so then I'm just saying very generally, be well. And what I mean by that is you want to take care of your mental and physical health. And so when it comes to medical conditions, don't ignore it. You don't want to say, I'm sure it's not a big problem, I'll be fine. have your regular physicals, see your doctor regularly. When you notice physical symptoms, get help for them. If you've been told you have high blood pressure, then do something about it. Don't let medical conditions go untreated. If you have obstacles, particularly financial, to medical care, then look into government programs that can be helpful. Look into communities that community organizations that provide assistance for medications or for healthcare in general. But take care of your body overall, because there's this link between our physical health and then our brain health and our overall physical health. So don't ignore physical conditions, particularly ones that affect your heart. Again, heart health and brain health are really closely tied together. And so when you want to think about having a healthy brain, you want to have a healthy heart. And so do the things that you need to keep your blood pressure under control. If you have diabetes, take care of that, keep your blood sugar under control. All the things your doctors tell you to do, try to follow those recommendations. If you need a second opinion, get a second opinion, but don't just ignore it. And if you think, oh, they're wrong, I don't think I have this problem, don't just assume that. There's experts for a reason. So just get treatment for those medical conditions. And then mental health is so important. And again, I could spend all day talking about this, but I think particularly for our community, it is so important to try to get past the historical stigma of mental health, thinking that, oh, I'm not crazy, I don't need to see someone. There's nothing about being, quote, crazy. It is about saying that mental health is really the same as physical health. Our bodies can work against us to cause depression, to cause anxiety. There's a brain basis for these different mental health conditions. So do what you need to do to treat it. I compare, because again, I talk about depression a lot as part of my research. I compare depression to something like diabetes, where if someone has diabetes, they're not going to say, oh, I don't want anyone to think I'm weak for having diabetes. I'm just going to not worry about it. No, that's not the thing to do. You treat it. And it's something that could be chronic, like diabetes. Some people have depression recurrently. And so know that you want to do the lifestyle things that can help to manage that, to keep it under wraps so that you're not feeling overtly depressed all the time. You're not feeling sad. You're not feeling unable to go about your life. And I'm using that as an example. It could be anxiety, it could be all sorts of things. But having a chronic condition, such as a mental health condition, is not any different than having a chronic medical condition. So do what you need to do. Might mean therapy. Doesn't mean you have to do it forever. It could be for a few months, could be for a year, could be longer. That's fine. Do what you need to do. It might mean medication sometimes. I tend to prefer to suggest therapy and exercise first, because exercise is great for depression and anxiety, but sometimes you need medication. Do not hesitate to see a professional to see if that's needed for you. There are other treatments too that are more kind of non-traditional, that if you have more severe depression, that you can talk to your doctor about, but see someone, talk about it. And again, there's nothing wrong with relying on family, relying on your faith community. All those things can be so helpful for mental health, but sometimes it's more than sometimes you need someone who has a more advanced specialty training in mental health. And that does not mean that your faith isn't strong. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that, again, I cannot pray away my high blood sugar. I need to go to the doctor and find out how to control my diabetes. So I'm going to still pray about it, but I'm going to also go and get that treatment. Same thing for mental health. Prayer is obviously going to be helpful in all the ways that we know that it is, but sometimes you still need to have a specialist, a doctor who can help you complement or kind of combined with things that you might do on your own. So again, could talk about this forever, but just I'm going to leave it there. And then if you have questions, let me know, but take care of your physical and mental health. That will help your brain health as well. Okay, next slide. So this is just a summary of what we just talked about, that it is, we have these kind of main pillars of brain health: physical exercise, nutrition, cognitive fitness, meaning that kind of mental engagement, medical health, as well as psychological health, sleep, and then social engagement. So these are our big pillars. These are the things that if you want to focus on your brain health, focus on these things. And so I want to take just a few minutes before questions to talk about kind of some of the things that I'm doing to try to address these different pillars of brain health. So next slide, please. So I started a company called CerebroFit. I'm so excited about this, that is designed to be sort of a one-stop for brain health. And so when you think, so for me, as a neuropsychologist, people come to me if they need an evaluation because their memory is declining, because they are having difficulty with driving or with like managing their finances, whatever it is. So like, is something wrong? Can you do an evaluation? And as a neuropsychologist, that's what I do. I give a group of different cognitive tests. I do an interview and I get their medical history and I try to figure out what's going on. And I give them recommendations. And so I've been doing this for years. And I was starting to get frustrated because when I would give recommendations for what they can do to support their brain health, I had to send people all over the place. And so I'm like, oh, do these 5 different things. And so here are 5 different places to go to do it. And I thought, well, gosh, I really wish there was one place people could go to get everything. And then a couple of years ago, I thought, you know what, I'm going to create one place someone can go to get everything. I can have a place where in one center, right now it's a virtual center, not a physical center, but it eventually will hopefully be a physical center where you can get all those things that you need done in one place. And so that's what led to CerebroFit. So the name comes, Cerebro means brain and fit. So we're thinking about brain fitness. And we are trying to offer a variety of different services that can support your brain. So I work on that cognitive fitness side in terms of doing an evaluation, but also something called cognitive training or cognitive rehab that I can work with you on improving your cognitive abilities. There's a really great trainer, Nate, who actually is my own personal trainer, as well as the trainer for my company. So I can tell you for sure, he will kick your butt in a good way, give you a great workout, but really wonderful. And he offers that online as well as in person in Atlanta. We have a nutritionist who has a really great approach for meeting you where you are. We were talking about this right before this webinar started, that she understands that whether it be for cultural reasons or whatever reasons, that she can't tell you, stop eating this, stop eating that. It's going to be eat less of this or replace this ingredient or add this to it. Really trying to help you develop healthy eating habits that fit within your goals and within your lifestyle and your culture, but can still help you to be healthier and support your brain better. Then we have Tina, who's a health and wellness coach. She basically, if you're trying to change your life and have healthier habits, she can basically work with you on like how to get that done. And so kind of like coaching you, but for health as opposed to coaching you physically. And then we have Angela, or Dr. Bethea Walsh, who is a really wonderful, wonderful psychologist who provides psychotherapy. And a lot of her focus is actually on the Black community in terms of dealing with things related to race-related stress, to past trauma, as well as things like substance abuse, depression, anxiety. But everything she does is focused on culturally sensitive therapy. And again, she's a fantastic person, fantastic therapist, and really can help with those issues. So this is the kind of integrated approach that we have, trying to offer different services that can help you in your brain health journey. So definitely look us up. I have the website there. Email me with questions about what we offer. I have made a point to try to make all the services affordable and to work with people if financial limitations are an issue, to see what we can do to have a sliding scale and have things in an affordable way. So definitely reach out if you're interested in any of that. And then, oh, I just tried to advance the slide. I forgot I'm not doing it. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that all the things I just talked about are talked about in greater detail in a book that I just finished writing. I'm very excited. I was just sharing earlier that I gave my book draft to the publisher just last week. It's going to be published by the American Psychological Association. And the little QR code there on the screen, if you scan that with your camera on your phone, or if you have a QR reader, it will take you to a website where if you want to find out when the book is going to be released, because right now the release date is to be determined, you can get updates and you can just sign up for email updates. I promise you, you will not be getting an email from me every day. You might forget that you signed up because I'll wait a month or two before I send something, because the point is not to pester you. The point is to say, hey, I'll let you know when there's updates, let you know when the book comes out, and everything we just discussed will have more details, more practical advice, more about the research. All of that will be in the book. So definitely sign up for updates if you're interested. And then if you want to know, next slide, please. If you want to know more about brain health in general, number one, remember that brain health is a lifelong process. And so you want to start working on that now, wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're thinking about your 10-year-old, if you're thinking about your 90-year-old grandmother, or anything in between, or wherever you are, wherever your family is, work on it now. It's a lifelong process. That also means be kind to yourself. You're not going to change your habits overnight. It's going to be baby steps, little by little, trying to live a healthier life. Next slide, please. And so if you want just kind of more regular updates on different things about brain health, the social media pages for my company, we have 5 days a week. We actually post little tidbits about brain health. So, and we have a focus every day. So on Mondays, we talk about mental health. Tuesday's going to be about senior health. Wednesdays will be about overall wellness, et cetera. And so I try to share articles that are based on science that talk about just little facts. I mean, so for example, last Friday was we have Fitness Friday, and the post was about how exercise helps anxiety. And so there's an article that talks about why exercise is beneficial for anxiety. So little things like that can help you think about some of these aspects of brain health. If you follow us on social media, if you have questions about anything I talked about today, any of the services or what have you, check out, you can email me. And then we have our website for the company and then the phone number as well. But I will acknowledge that email is going to be a better way of reaching me than phone. So, okay, I told you it was going to be a whirlwind. That was a lot, but I thank you for your attention and I'm happy to take your questions now.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Dotson. I know I actually learned a lot, and I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed to hear that naps are not that beneficial because they sure feel good. So
well, I will say, okay, an occasional nap is fine. And the issue is having long naps late in the afternoon. So let's not knock them too much.
Okay, all right. So I am going to stop sharing my screen right now, and then we're going to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. I'm looking through our chat box to see if there are any questions. There are lots of kudos and congratulations and people just excited about today's presentation.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Dotson.
Amazing. Yeah,
amazing. I'm doing a poor job. So it's amazing, but a little depressing because obviously I'm not doing a lot of those things. And so I need to work on that.
Well, it's goals for everyone. And like I said, my whole thing is it's overwhelming to hear all the things that you should be doing, but most of us aren't doing. And so it's like, take it one step at a time, just what I recommend for people is choose one and then work on it for a little bit. And so again, I think if you're going to do anything, exercise. So say, okay, I need to move more. And so that doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to start working out 4 times a week if I haven't before. It means you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to try 2 days a week to take a walk after dinner. Okay, there you go. You just did better. Like you just took a step. So make that a habit. Then say, okay, I need to add in some strengthening stuff. So I'm going to try to do 5 push-ups or modified push-ups a day or whatever, like just start adding little things, you know what I mean? And then like you do that and then you start working towards the ultimate goal of reaching those recommended activity levels. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start one thing and then little steps.
But my hair, Dr. Dotson. So give me some more practical tips because I might be one of the few ones that still put a relaxer in her hair and really, if I sweat, then it's going to be like, oh, I just wasted my money.
Believe me, I feel you because I went natural like 9 years ago now. And before that, I mean, I was already, so since I teach fitness classes, I was already teaching fitness classes. And I was like, it was awful because after every single class, I'm like, I have to blow, and it was longer. So I had to blow dry it and then flat iron it and all that. And so honestly, I decided to change my hairstyles in part because of that. The other thing I recommend for people is that not everyone's going to say, oh, I'm going to go natural because I can sweat and not worry about it. But I think that you can say, for example, that you work out, for example, later in the evening. So where you had your hair looking cute all day, you work out in the evening and then wrap it up or whatever. You could also say that you can decide to change wear your hair differently on days that you have more cardiovascular workouts where you're sweating more. And so, for example, let's say if you're going to start with 2 days a week, again, even just walking briskly can get your heart going. Maybe you're not going to sweat quite as much as like running, and so that's a fine way of starting. But you can say that, okay, on these days, I know that I'm going to need to do more to my hair to kind of get it back to where I wanted it, and not have it as effective. The other days, you're doing things such as weight training, which won't cause as much sweating. You can do more of the yoga-based kinds of activities for strength and balance, and you're still moving and exercising, but not messing up your hair as much. So things like that can be helpful. Other thing I'll add is that physical activity period is helpful. So meaning that you do want to have structured exercise where you're intentionally working out, but moving is good. For example, if you like gardening and you have a garden, gardening is making you get up and down and like you're moving and digging and stuff like that. That actually is movement that is helpful for you. So moving throughout the day is helpful. Deciding to take the stairs more instead of the elevator when you actually go back to normal life and go into other buildings. Like I said, walking your dog, all those things that don't feel like exercise are actually still physical activity that can be beneficial. And those are also things that aren't going to mess with your hair as much. So you could increase your physical activity in lots of ways that don't necessarily mean like super sweating. Now, having said that, you still need to do some of those more intense exercises sometimes.
No, I appreciate that, Dr. Dotson. And I think what I'll just do is wait till the day before I get my hair done. And that's where I put my intense exercise in. But, hopefully I wasn't the only one that maybe had that question, but that's one of the things I think that has been a big barrier for me. But now hearing your presentation, now I know I need to be more intentional and really try to work better, toward that. And hopefully maybe next time y'all see me, maybe I have a short fro. We'll see. But no, I thank you for addressing that. I'm sorry, Mia, I had cut you off. So I know you were trying to tell people to put in questions.
Yeah, I was just going to remind you, you can use the chat box to put in questions, and we actually have a question now for you to answer. So while you guys are thinking of questions, we will get Dr. Dotson to address this one. So the question is from Kara, and the question is, although social media is a good way to stay connected, with such increased use and links to negative mental, emotional health, particularly in the younger generation, is there any research showing if it's doing more harm than good to our brains?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Unfortunately, there are a lot of negatives that come with social media. There's so actually in my book, I have a whole little section where I talk about this issue, because one of the things that the way I tied it into this was that when it comes to sleep, a lot of people have this habit of at the end of the night wanting to get on social media. And the problem is that tends to get people worked up. And so there's something that people call doom scrolling, which you might have heard of, which is when you start looking online, you're almost drawn towards the negative. And so you just kind of keep seeing things that are upsetting, whether it be upsetting posts that people are putting on Facebook or just negative news stories. So much grabs our attention when it's negative. And so what happens is that you're supposed to be winding down, but instead you're getting your body and your mind revved up because you're getting really upset, you're getting really anxious. I'm not gonna lie, I had my own situations with this lead in the last year or so with the election, where because I'm feeling upset, the election, all the things that have been going on, George Floyd, whatever, where it's almost like I wanted to see what people were saying that was going to piss me off. I was just kind of like, I'm gonna like rev myself up more. And like, why am I doing this? Why am I going when I know that this person who's like a friend of a friend's cousin who has me on Facebook, and I'm going to see what they said because I know that they're going to say something that's going to be really insulting to me. And I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. Stop feeding that negativity. And so that's a side story. I'm sorry. So going back to the research, there is research that shows that social media can have negative effects, that particularly when people are during times that are more volatile, particularly with the increasing kind of politicization of everything, that spending lots of time on social media is actually more associated with depression, anxiety, stress, other negative things. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use social media. It means you have to be mindful of the fact that it's too easy to get drawn into the negative side of it. And so it might mean that, okay, I'm going to, number one, limit how much I do it. I'm not going to spend all day on it. I'm going to limit when I do it so that I'm not going to be late at night when I'm trying to wind down doing it. But also it means being selective. So I have certain people that I'm like, I'm not going to have you in my newsfeed. So even if I keep you as a friend, for example, I can hide you from my newsfeed. So that if I'm scrolling down, I'm not seeing what you're posting because you're posting too much that's negative. It shouldn't. I wish it didn't have to come to that, but if that's what it means, if that's what it takes for me to get the positives, because I want to see the baby pictures and the dog pictures and the vacation pictures when people used to have vacations or whatever that's positive on there. If I want to do that, I can either selectively get rid of some friends or hide what I see so that I'm not getting that. So that was a really convoluted way of saying there is a downside to social media. Try to use it in a way that's smart, based on when you look at it and then how much time you focus on it and then who you're allowing to give you that input. And don't go looking for people who are going to upset you.
Right.
I'm saying that to myself too.
So one of the things that we have heard through, I guess I've heard in the last 6 months, refers to diet and intermittent fasting. Do you know about any benefits to fasting and or any reasons why people shouldn't do it? So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, interesting question, because I tried this myself. And the reason why I tried it myself is because there actually is good research that it can be helpful. So I'm going to tell you what I know from the research that I read and then also my personal experience with it. So intermittent fasting, for those who aren't familiar with it, is when you intentionally choose certain times of day where you're not eating, and then certain times of day when you eat. So restricting the time when you're choosing to put calories into your body. And the reason for doing that is that it kind of resets your body in different ways that can be helpful. And actually research has shown that it can be really helpful for things like diabetes. Some people have said that it can increase longevity. There seems to be potentially some benefits for cognitive functioning. This is a newer area of research, but there are some promising results that it can have positive benefits. So I'm not saying everyone should go and do it. I'm saying that there are some promising research results. For me, it was enough for me to be willing to try it, because what I liked about it is that it doesn't require you to dramatically change what you're eating. Again, I've always said, don't go for these diets that are like, you can't have any, fat, or you can't have any sugar or any carbs. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, balance your diet, eat a balanced diet. So you're eating the same things, again, within reason, but in a restricted time period. So I tried it. There's different schedules that you can do. So there's like one that's called it's 16-8. So it means that you fast for 16 hours and then you eat for 8 hours, and you don't eat nonstop for 8 hours. You eat all of your meals within 8 hours, and then you have 16 hours that you don't. And so that, but some people will do like half a day on, half a day off. There's different schedules that you can do. And so when I tried it, what I found is that for me, it actually started to affect I started getting headaches, and it affected my focus, and I didn't like the way I felt. And so I did it for, I think, 3 weeks, and I was just like, yeah, this is just it's not working for me. And overall, my thought is to just have a balanced diet and not to go into any of these kind of diets. But I'm going to be honest, during COVID, I think like a lot of people probably put on a little bit of weight. Not probably, I did. And so I was trying to get myself back to my pre-COVID weight and thought I would do it that way. And then I thought, oh, this might be a lifestyle thing for me where I can keep this up and this be how I eat. And it just, for me, I didn't like it. It didn't work. And I found that, I think particularly because I wasn't eating until noon, that my work productivity in the morning was suffering. And I'm like, I can't do this. So I'm going to find another way to be healthy. So that's my personal anecdote. Again, research does suggest it might be helpful. So it's not one of those things where I'm going to tell you don't do it. I'm just saying, look up the Mayo Clinic website and American Heart Association, I believe, have some useful links about how to do it and how to do it safely. You do want to make sure that if you have medical conditions underlying, that you don't just jump into it, because if you change anything dramatic about your diet and you have medical conditions, you should talk to your doctor first, because you want to make sure that for what you have, that it's not going to be bad for you, because not everything fits everybody.
Right. Well, that it's interesting you say that, because one of the questions that came in is, how long can you do this without damaging your thyroid system?
So that's a good question. And I don't want to speak beyond what I know. I'm not sure. That's the kind of thing that you definitely want to talk to your doctor about, because of that possibility, both in terms of if you have an underlying condition and for long-term changes. So for example, in my case, had I been willing to stick to it more than the 2 or 3 weeks I did, at my next doctor appointment, I would have told her what I was doing. to make sure that she didn't have any concerns about me doing it. I'm not saying that you have to go to your doctor anytime you make any change. I'm saying if it's a big change, or if you have a medical condition, then you probably do want to just consult to make sure that's not going to have immediate or long-term effects. So good question, and one to direct to your doctor for sure.
Okay. All right. And then there's another thought that there's a magical number or gold standard for the amount of hours of sleep we should be getting. On average, what would you say that number should be?
Yes, great question. If there is a magic number, it's a range. 7 to 8 hours is what's recommended by most experts. And so, and 7 to 8 hours on average. So again, if you have a night where you get less sleep, don't freak out. It's fine. You just want to overall aim for that. And so that seems to be like the sweet spot for most people. Now you'll hear people say, oh, I don't need that much sleep. And because they don't need as much sleep to not be tired in the morning doesn't mean that their brain doesn't need that much sleep. And so I would say you do still want to shoot for that in general. And so I mentioned that for me, the past year or so, I've gotten more enlightened about sleep and how important it is. And so that I want to change things. And so I will, when I get into bed, when I know I'm sleepy, if it's the weekend, I don't set my alarm at all, but during the week, whatever time I go to bed, I set my alarm for 7.5 hours later, so that even if it takes me half an hour, I know I'm getting at least 7 hours. Now, in a perfect world, I set it for 8.5 hours and shoot for 8, but I'm just realistic that with my schedule, 7 is more reasonable than 8, but you do want to try to shoot for 7 or 8 hours.
That's a great point. I think that's a tip all of us can utilize, because we all aim to get 7 or more, but actually saying, okay, I have a timer set, is a wonderful tip. So
Yeah.
we have another question. One is, COVID has contributed to social isolation, particularly for older adults. What suggestions do you have for helping this population?
I'm sorry, suggestions for
I guess
what?
regarding social isolation, what can we do
For
to
older adults?
For older adults, yeah, that's such a huge thing. And I was actually part of a workshop with the National Institute of Mental Health about this very issue, because social isolation in the older adults is already kind of a problem. They call it a pandemic of loneliness, and then it's gotten worse with COVID. For various reasons. So that's a big question. I think the main things is that whether it's yourself that's older or a loved one, is to kind of follow what I was saying before in terms of being creative about staying connected, meaning that we don't have traditional communication, we don't have traditional contact, but are there ways to kind of get around that? And so depending on your comfort level. So right now, people vary in what they're doing in terms of how much they're staying distant. So you want to be safe, right? Particularly because older adults are more vulnerable, and Black older adults are especially vulnerable when it comes to COVID. So whether it be that you're having, I would say, for example, for you or for a loved one who's older and isolated, are there people who you can set up a regular sort of contact schedule? That might sound funny, but literally have, 3 days a week, we have someone who's calling. We know someone's going to call and talk to them, and they figure out what time works for them. So with your family, you can say, okay, I'm going to call grandma on Mondays, you call her on Wednesdays, I'm calling on Fridays, and make that part of your schedule. If you're the one who's older and trying not to be disconnected, reach out to people and say, can we set a phone date? I actually do that myself, even though I'm not older. And so I have standing phone dates with people. And so sometimes it's phone, sometimes it can be like this because of video conference, but I literally plan it as part of my week, because if not, we get busy, we don't do it, and then you feel more lonely. So I would say try to plan for it and try to be creative about how to do it. If technology is an issue, hopefully there's at least a phone that can be used. But if you can teach the person to use something like Zoom or FaceTime, then even better. But I think the biggest thing is to try to plan for it, and then as things get better, to try to, even if it's a socially distanced get together, right? It's going to be spring soon. And so if you live in the same town, then you can say, you might have seen people will have like a driveway get together. So they have people situated, spaced out in their driveway, but they're still in person. And, you can even have foods in the middle of the driveway, and you go one at a time, get your food. I'm saying this from experience. I've done this. It still works. It's still a way of being able to have connections. So try to be creative and schedule it, plan for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering that. I'm going to check just to see if we can have any more questions. So looks like we've answered all the questions for today. So thank you so much for taking time to enlighten us about our brain health. I'm sure everyone took some tips from it. And I did as well. I think one of the things that I learned is about brain plasticity. And so I'm going to look into that a little bit further. And so I encourage you all to do that too. If there's any topics that came up today, reach out to Dr. Dotson or, look into those different research studies yourself and see what they're about. So I want to share my screen once more with you before we wrap up, just to let you all know a little bit about today's presentation.
And did you see the message from Miss Jackie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so I will address it. Really, to go over today's program, I wanted to just remind you that today's program was presented to you by Faith Village Connections and the Alter program. And some of the things that that Faith Village Connections offers is a monthly newsletter. If you all are already subscribed to it, you had the pleasure of getting to kind of meet Dr. Dotson before her actual presentation today, but we try to keep it very relevant and timely. So if you are not signed up or if you know anyone that might enjoy getting that monthly newsletter, please let us know. Also, if you're interested in joining our research registry, we would love to share opportunities regarding research, whether it's through the Alter program, Faith Village, or just what's going on in general. We would connect you with those different things. So these are ways to reach out to us. Dr. Epps, her email is listed here as well. And then our program today will be available on YouTube, and we are available on all of the social media sites. So I'm gonna just jump back. And what we also wanted to let you guys know is that the Faith Village partners with AARP, and Sage Navigator is one of our partners. And so they are offering a chat and chew session on the second Fridays. Is that in March? Just to clarify, in March, second Fridays in March, to address social isolation. So for those of you that are interested in learning more about tips and ways to cope with that, that's a great way to learn more and connect with others. So if you're interested, I want to give you the phone number. It's 404-549-4504. And we will have information about these sessions in our newsletter, but call now, get registered, and then obviously you can learn more once we do it. So they're virtual courses and anybody can attend, so please let us know. Just to go through some of our questions to make sure I don't miss anything. Dr. Epps is posting just when the video will be on YouTube, and we will send a link to everyone who has attended today and that is registered. And we thank you all so much for your time. I wanted to say that we always say, this is a great program. This was really good today. I think it's something that we all can use no matter how old you are. So, this reaches out to, our younger generation, our younger caregivers, or anyone in general can benefit from this. So thank you again. Dr. Epps, any closing words or final words before we wrap up today?
Man, no, and usually I always have a lot of things to say, but this was just a really great session. And please just be on the attendees, please be on the lookout for your follow-up email. There will be some links. I will reshare the newsletter in that email as well for those that may not be on our mailing list that talks more about CerebroFit and our interview that we had with Dr. Dotson. And anybody interested in any type of research for the African-American community, dementia, for the faith-based community, please do reach out and complete the survey as well that we will be sending to you all on tomorrow. And thank you. And let us know what else you want to learn about. And if you put that in a survey, that would be really great, because again, our goal is to bring the information to you, the information that you need. not what we think, but exactly what you need to continue to take care of yourself and those that you support. So again, thank you. And it's so good to see everybody. I see so many names that I do recognize, and just thank you for your continued support. So I guess I did have something to say, Mia.
I know I didn't want to like end it without just throwing it to you one last time. So I'll end and say thank you again. We hope that you guys are blessed and be safe, and we'll see you at the next Alter Virtual Forum.
All right,
Take care.
thank you.